My name is Rehema Ellis, and I'm a correspondent with NBC News. It's really nice to be here in Austin, Texas, and to be with this panel, of whom I'm going to introduce you to in just a moment. My Aunt Minnie, who was born in Beaumont, North Carolina, just turned 84 years old yesterday up in Boston. Oftentimes when she would feel happy about something, there was a saying in America about how tickled pink we are. Not Aunt Minnie. She would always say tickled black. I'm tickled black today to be in this room with you folks and the folks on this stage to talk about the state of black education in America, because I don't think we talk enough about it. It is a condition that, because you're in this room, it says to me that you're concerned about it. But consider this. We talk a lot about how we've got a graduation rate in America of about 80-some-odd%, a modern day high of graduating our students. But the gap for black students is about 14%. So we're close to 69 or something like that in terms of the graduation rate for black students versus what it is for whites. And when you drill down on that number, you have to ask yourself, why is that happening? It's because we have so many of our kids who are at risk in terms of poverty. At least that's what I think. I'm going to find out what this panel thinks as to what this is all about. But you dig deeper, and you talk about what's happening for kids who don't make it to graduation. They drop out. We've got about 50% of black kids, I think, who are dropping out of high school. Today they're called dropouts. Tomorrow they'll be called unemployed. And you'll have to hope that somewhere or another they can find a job in what's becoming a more highly technological society. You can't get your car fixed by anyone who doesn't know how to work a computer. So what's going to happen to our children in America if they have dropped out of school? I think it's something that I want to talk to this panel about because you're making a difference. Sitting next to me, Margaret Fortune. She's president and CEO of School of Education. It's a network of public charter schools in Sacramento and San Bernardino counties, focusing on, the word that I focused on was closing the achievement gap. It didn't say narrowing. It said closing the achievement gap for black students. She's also chair of the California Charter School Association and the first black woman to hold that position, which is the largest state charter association in the country. Am I right?
That's correct.
We're going to talk about how important it is that she's in that role. Next, Dr. Howard Fuller, civil rights activist, education reform advocate, professor of Marquette University, and he founded an institute for the transformation of learning at Marquette. And the mission, support exemplary education options, not mediocre, not ordinary, not even traditional, but exemplary education options for children, empower families, especially low-income families, so that they might choose the best options for their children. First of all, you gotta have good options to choose from. Let's figure out how you get the best of that. Chris Stewart, CEO, Wayfinder Foundation, nonprofit that invests in grassroots anti-poverty and education activism, past president, board member of Minneapolis Public School Board of Education, and he just never stops advocating for creating safe schools that prepare our children for the real world, including fixing our cars. Because you can make a good living as a mechanic, by the way. So, we're going to talk about maybe how we got here, but I want us to leave here today giving people some thoughts of how you are succeeding in educating black children in this country. Because I, for one, know it can happen. Besides the fact that all of us, I think, are black, and all of us have been educated, so it tells me that it's not a moonshot, that we can do this. So, Margaret, would you share with me what you think is the one thing that you can do with students to close that gap? Is there one takeaway above all others that you think is so important?
Well, I tell you, Rehema, I have been operating schools for 10 years now under this effort to close the African American achievement gap in Sacramento. And if there was one skill that I had to focus on, if it wasn't high expectations or commitment or good old-fashioned hard work, it really would be focusing on literacy and reading. I find that so many of our children come to school in kindergarten without the prerequisite literacy skills to make them successful. So we spend a lot of time and effort on focusing on reading fluency. and doing that in grades K through 3. And because students come to us so far behind in reading, we're now doing it all the way up to high school to work on their reading fluency. We stop in schools teaching kids how to read after 2nd grade, right? When 3rd grade, now you're teaching kids they're reading to learn other subject areas. So if I had to pick one thing, one academic thing to really focus on, it's really reading and literacy.
Dr. Fuller, what would you say?
I would say I don't know one thing. And I think it's a mistake to pick one thing because the problems facing our children are so severe at so many different levels that if we let this country think, oh, if y'all just give us some money for this, we're going to be good, I think that that's a mistake. Because I think the fundamental problem we face is people don't care about our children. Our children are not a priority. We have all these conferences and people, blah, 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 blah. But when it gets down to it, fundamentally, people do not care about black children. And they particularly don't care about poor black children. And so whatever it is we do, we have to do it with the knowledge that it has to be revolutionary, because even to educate our children is a revolutionary act in America.
Well, clear enough. I'm in the business of news, and I do stories on schools that succeed in educating black children. It's considered news, to your point. But Chris, even though, as Dr. Fuller says, you might have to look at a variety of things at one time, there is still maybe the step-by-step. Or is there anything that you would say is one of those steps that needs to be considered?
So you're not going to get me to disagree with Dr. Fuller.
Yeah,
No, and I didn't either.
Come on,
Right,
Chris.
right.
I didn't either.
I'm in news. I know trick when I see one, right?
That's a
Start
wise
with
man.
that one, right? These are the educators. I will try to split the difference. I will say that I agree that our kids are not a priority. We have 8 million black children walking into schools every day that aren't designed for them, were never made for them, and are not going to help them reach their highest potential. I say that everywhere I go because I want you to know the number. I want to bring the number in the room and make it real. The number one thing I think they face from the very get-go, even the ones that do care about our kids, have a belief gap. A gap between what our kids are actually capable of doing and what they think they're capable of doing, right? So if you want to close any gap first, I feel like you have to close the belief gap. I've never visited a school that was successfully educating black children that had that belief gap in their language and in the way that they talked about students, just awfulizing our students to death, talking about them in ways where you would feel like they weren't capable of learning. But if you did make me pick out some concrete things, right, and this is not to disagree with Dr. Fuller, I would say the one thing I could say is making sure that all the adults line up together with a common mission. You cannot have a successful school without a strong school leader, without a staff that is all on board with a coherent educational philosophy, with the expectation that they will continuously improve by looking at data over time. That is the recipe.
I'm just saying, man, you listed 5 things. And then you're trying to sneak it in like 1A, 1B, 1C.
I called it one thing by saying you got to line up the adults.
Yeah, I got you.
That's the one thing. Now I got to tell you which adults.
Yeah, I'm feeling that.
You make me want to ask so many questions about people. First, you say that people don't care about our children and that people don't believe in our children. How do you change that?
I mean, that's a very expensive question.
But it's also a community question, too.
Right.
I think that there are people who care deeply about our children. Our own black community cares deeply about our children. And I know that in the community where I'm from, Sacramento, California, black students are the lowest performing subgroup outside of students with special needs, and they're overrepresented among students with special needs. And we are a minority of the population, 6%. So we care passionately about our children, but we created a regional initiative and said we've got a regional problem, we need a regional initiative, but we knew that we had to build a coalition of non-black people to care about our kids. But the impetus came from us. And for us, setting out the marker of saying, it doesn't change the whole system, but we're going to create 10 schools that are going to be approved on one night to close the African American achievement gap in Sacramento by preparing kids for college starting in kindergarten.
Wait a minute, did you say 10 schools created in one night? Is that what you said?
Yes, we got all of the approval in one night, and we started on the first day of Black History Month with our board meeting, and we ended the board meeting on the second day of Black History Month because it took them all night and into the morning to decide that we were worthy of this investment. But when it comes down to it, there was only one Black vote on that board. But I tell you, there was...
Whose vote was that?
That was the board president. The rest of the board was white and Latino. But the audience was Black, and the authors were Black, and the influence, the political influence came from the Black community to push the region that we are very much a part of leading to do something on behalf of our children. And so I think that as Black people, we can't allow it to be a part of our local narrative that people don't care.
Dr. Fuller, when you say people don't care about our children, it's a profound statement, but it can't be a crippling one forever, can it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think if you're going to start out with what is the foundation that we have to have, I would argue that if you read a book like Marianne Williamson's book, Return to Love, and she was talking about the fact that, she was talking about the fable of the frog and the prince and how the princess kissed the frog and turned the frog into a prince. And she says that this was about the miraculous power of love to create the conditions for transformation. And that if you don't love people, you can't really understand them. You can't understand them, you can't reach them. Clearly, if you can't reach them, you can't teach them. And when I say that, I had a person come up to me and say, "Are you trying to say we need to love these children like I do my husband or my wife?" And I'm like, "Hey man, I don't know nothing about y'all, so I don't know. I don't know how y'all do." But the point here is we're not talking about romantic love. We're talking about agape. We're talking about unredeeming love, expecting nothing in return. I would argue that that is the precondition to begin to do the things that we have to do for our children. So
You can clap. You can clap on that.
No, but the point I'm trying to get, and I'll make it briefly, when I say that people don't care about us, what I'm saying is, it's like Derek Bell made the point that racism is not just some tangential thing in America. Agreed. That racism is fundamental to the American fabric. Mm-hmm. So if you start out understanding that, and you don't have you're not bamboozled on that question, then what I'm suggesting is that we start out understanding that from the very beginnings of our being brought here, they did not care about us. So therefore, whatever it is we do, we are going to have to be at the center of doing it for our children. And without qualification, without being mealy-mouthed, without being unapologetically Black. Black people come to these conferences, man, they be over there whispering and stuff, because, fundamentally, we know that even in these spaces, we're in territories where people may be trying to address what's happening, but fundamentally, they can't have the same reason for being here that we have to have, because that's just our reality as a people. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that we have to begin there, and then you begin to talk about the things that Margaret is doing or Chris is doing, or we can talk about all the things you're supposed to do to create great schools. But if that is not there, fundamentally, I don't think we're going to change it, and that is on us as a people.
Chris, you've got to follow that again. I don't know who did the seating thing.
You picked the seating order.
I did, and I'm reconsidering right now. I'm rethinking this.
Because part of it is, if that's the basis of where you begin, and that is love, you're not, how is it even possible that for all the Black children in this country, and we have Black children in schools all across the country, and mainly in segregated schools, am I right? Segregated schools. How are you going to have Black people at the head of every single one of those segregated schools, and hopefully that black person loves those black children in those schools.
So there's a lot to unpack there. The first one is a black school is not by definition a segregated school. I just want to make sure we keep designations right and clear. Because segregation is when the government assigns you to inferior schools on purpose because of your race. A school where parents have chosen it because it's culturally affirming, that happens to be all black, is not a segregated school. That is a black school. And last time I checked, those are completely legal in my world, right?
Well, but you don't think we have any segregated schools in America?
I do believe that there are some schools that the government is assigning kids to inferior schools, but they're mostly district schools for one, and they come as a result of educational redlining, where people have drawn a gerrymandered educational district to put you in the middle of it and made sure that all the good stuff was taken out of it and sent to places where white people exist, right?
And so
right?
it's led to what we call zip code education, right? Zip code learning?
I mean, I like to call it what it is redlining. They're drawing a line around you, cutting off all avenues outward. Like you get no avenues out. So your only choice. So that is the government assigning you to an inferior school on purpose. And to split the difference with what Dr. Fuller is saying, I mean, you have to know for a fact that if white children were failing at the rate of black children, we would have rethought the whole system already.
There you go.
We would have changed the way that we fund schools, staff them, make budgets for them, create them, roll them out. Everything about the entire system would be different if white students were failing at the rate. So where is the lack of the political will to do it when year after year it's like Groundhog Day? We get bad news year after year after year. It's hard for you to find a state where black children in 4th grade are making above more than 25% of them are proficient. It's hard for you to find a state. Many states it's 17%, 16%, 15%. If those were white numbers, we would have a completely different school system across the country. We probably would have nationalized it by now, made it a federal priority to change it. But because it's black students, you have to believe what Dr. Fuller is saying is at the basis of it. I don't believe that love is it's a lovely idea, but I think, because I can't, after 400 years, I don't think that we're gonna have an outbreak of love tomorrow for black children, right? We've been waiting for that for a long time, and what we keep getting is more information that that's not coming. But what we can have is some racial realism about the system and the world that we live in, and that leads me to believe what I just heard here is true. It's only gonna come from us. The schools are gonna come from us. The schools that are gonna educate black children are gonna come out of the black community, out of the hands of black educators who have thought through the design of the school from day one with black children in mind.
To that point, in California, you're looking at something that could be revolutionary in this country in terms of a bill that you're proposing. Because one of the things that's happening in schools where a large population of the children attend are black children is there's also high poverty. And what do you do in those communities where you have high poverty? How do you make certain that you get some resources to those schools? And you're attempting to address that in California, aren't you?
I am, and this is something that is a bill that the California Charter Schools Association is sponsoring. It's called Assembly Bill 2635. And California recently, under Governor Brown, changed the way it financed public schools. We got rid of all categorical programs and said that all the money is going to go to the locals, and there'll be a plan that everybody has to develop. And there was an acknowledgement that some students are more expensive to educate because they're doing poorly academically. And the state recognized 3 groups of students as high needs: English learners, low-income students, and foster and homeless youth. The assumption in going into that, Rehema, was that because the state identified low-income students, that all black students were provided for. But we all know that all black people are not low-income. And what is the case is that regardless of income, black students underperform because it's not about income, it's about race. Now in California, we've scrubbed that from the conversation in a certain way through a proposition called Proposition 209 that was passed in the 90s when Pete Wilson was governor. And it said that you can no longer consider race in public policy. It got rid of affirmative action. And the effect of that was to further make invisible black students. And no one has been able to come up with a proxy for race in order to direct resources to black students who are the lowest performing subgroup outside of students with special needs. And so the bill that the Charter School Association is sponsoring would identify the lowest performing subgroup as a subgroup that would also be covered under the high needs categorization, along with English learners, low-income students, and foster and homeless youth. This would mean that an additional 90,000 African-American students would drive funding to the schools that serve them, because that's the unfunded category, the invisible black student, the student that doesn't income qualify into help, but based on their test scores and academic performance and low cohort graduation rates and high suspension rates, clearly needs extra support. Now, the wonderful part of this story, and we're just getting started, is that we have built an alliance with a group that typically sues the California Charter School Association and the people we represent, and that is the California School Boards Association. They've come on as a supporter. They just announced it last week.
But talk about how they came on as a supporter. We had a conversation about this. That's why I'm bringing this up. That there's a dynamic here that's present that wasn't present before. Tell us what that is.
So I've been in education policy for about 20 years. And I've known the fellow who's the executive director of the California Charter School, of the California School Boards Association for about that amount of time. And what has happened here is an alignment of interest and relationships. You mentioned that I'm the incoming chair of the Charter School Association.
First black woman.
And now the California School Boards Association has a black chair and a black executive director.
I hear love coming in here somewhere.
And typically,
I just hear it, I'm sorry.
Typically, we don't talk to each other. We're so divided in our camps that we don't talk to each other. But this is such a miraculous opportunity in a year when California has $2 billion extra dollars after all public schools are fully funded. $2 billion extra dollars that must go to public schools. It's a strategic time for black people in positions of leadership to be talking about each other, to be talking to each other, and to be aligning behind the interests of African American students. And the thing is that, California likes to pretend that we are in a post-racial society. At least that's how we treat our public policy. And so we have, in this legislation, not mentioned race. We've just talked about performance. And on that basis, have an opportunity through AB 2635 to hopefully direct $360 million of additional resources to the schools that serve African American children who are in need. And this is being authored by 3 members of the California Legislative Black Caucus, Shirley Weber, Mike Gibson, and Autumn Burke.
Like I said, I hear love going on here. Because this is South by Southwest, would like to encourage you to offer your questions via the app, or you can go to slido.com or hashtag South by Southwest EDU. And I see a question here that I want to address to Dr. Fuller to start. And the question is, how do you get the black community to unify in order to close the gap for our students? Dr. Fuller.
The first thing I would argue is I don't think there is a black community. What I think there are black communities. And the reason why I'm saying that is black people have a lot of different interests. Not all black people think the same. It's just like when white people want us to do something, why don't y'all get together? You know what I mean? Like, what? But we have some people, no, seriously, I mean, we have people who belong to unions. We have people who are against unions. We have people who belong to churches. We have people who don't belong to churches. And what I think we have to do is not try to unify the black community. We have to unify whoever is willing to be unified to fight. Because the reality of it is that if we sit around and wait for all of us to somehow get together to help our kids, it's never going to happen.
So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, well, no, that's what we say. Because most of us who say that don't believe it when we say it. So what I'm saying is what we need to figure out is who is it that is ready to fight? What is it that you're willing to fight for? And when do we get it on? Because if what we try to do is to wait for all of us to get together, that's not going to happen. But here's the thing. It never happened. Even when people start waxing poetically about the civil rights movement that they've never studied or been a part of, because if you knew about that, you would know that there were clear divisions within their movement. There was a group of black ministers who met King when he got off the plane to tell him, hey man, our white folks doing okay, we don't need you here. You know, so the reality of it is that at this moment in history, we have to find out who's willing to fight for our children and what is it that you're willing to fight for. And then where we can unify across various sectors, or what do you all call it? It's sectors and whatever, yeah, intersect, all those words y'all use.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
No, I'm sorry.
No, it's not my word.
I take that back. No, but seriously, the point I'm trying to make is there are some of us who believe in charter schools. There's some of us who believe in traditional public schools. There's some of us who believe in private schools. There's some of us who believe that integration is the only answer. There's some of us who don't believe that. What I'm suggesting is our kids are in such deep conditions that whoever thinks they got something that will work for our kids, work on it. Mm-hmm. Don't wait for everybody to come over and say, I'm with this. You see what I'm saying? Because that's not going to happen. But what can happen from our various perches, we can fight. And as Margaret said, at different moments in time, there may be this period where we could unite certain forces. But even when that happens, just like interest convergence theory, it's not likely to be permanent because we don't come to some of those moments of unity with the same worldview. But that's okay. Right? That's okay. Because as long as we continue to fight on many different fronts for our children and unite when we can, I'm with that.
Chris, another question coming from folks, and that is, can you describe how schools can better be designed to meet the needs of black students, and more importantly, what can schools do immediately to make positive changes?
Well, that's a tough one, because I don't think there's any one way to design a school. If you travel the country, the Education Trust has a database of schools that are knocking it out of the park. So there are schools you can go and look at and see that they are doing a good job. It's just not true that all black kids are having universal failure everywhere, and we should often mention that in rooms like this too, because I think sometimes we start to talk as if all black children are failing, and they're not. But when you go look at those schools, they're all different kinds of schools. There is no, like, I couldn't say to you that they're all Montessori schools, or they're all Waldorf schools, or they're all open schools. They're different kinds of schools. So I think what people have to be open to is actually seeking those schools out and learning from them. In the district that I was a school board member in, I just didn't feel like there was a lot of appetite to go and look at some of the best schools that were doing great things. We had to struggle to get people on a plane and take them places to show them schools where black children were succeeding.
Why?
I always found that, one, because of the belief gap. I mean, there's an arrogance in some districts around, we know what to do. We just need more money, or whatever. It's not us. It's not the design. So there's nothing we can learn from outside of that. And that was a problem, because if you can't get over that part, you can't really make changes. The one thing I will say, though, is when I was on the school board, there were times when I would look out in the crowd when we were about to make a major decision, and I knew in my heart of hearts that just 4 black people in the room could change something that we were doing. Like, would have made the difference, right? So when you ask what can people concretely do, I don't need a whole community to come together. I do need about 4 to 15 black people with loud voices to come together at very specific times, right? When very specific decisions are being made that will have impacts on children for years to come. And when we had that in the room, it changed the course of decisions that we made. And when we didn't have that in the room, it made a big difference.
I'd love to build on what Chris is talking about seeking out excellence and being a student of excellent schools that serve black children well. It's a part of the work that we do at Fortune School, and what we found is that out of the 10,000 schools that there are in California, there are 12 with a majority African American students that are in the top half of academic performance and in the top 10% of similar schools. And we went around and visited and looked for commonalities. And one of the things that you will always hear the school leaders and teachers say is that they start with setting the tone for learning. Number one is about the culture of the classroom and how we do school. And they spend as much time on how we do school and teaching kids the routines and procedures around how we do school as they do academics and before they get to the academics. And then you hear a lot about academic rigor, about math, English language arts, writing, science, especially hands-on science. You hear about the arts and music. You hear a lot of attention to detail on making sure that students are assessed and that teachers are learning from the assessments to prepare for the next day and the next week's lesson. You hear a lot about very deep planning. You also hear about investment in intervention. One of the schools that is the highest performing is called Wilder's Academy in Inglewood. They have extra fully credentialed intervention teachers, 2 per each grade level, 1 in English language arts and 1 in math. And they have a portfolio of students who they give extra help to. And when you talk to the students, they say it's because of that intervention teacher who got them specifically on task with a specific skill that allowed them to be successful academically. There is an embrace of academic rigor. Those are a few practical things that we've learned.
I'm concerned about what you said, fully credentialed teachers in reading and math? Mm-hmm. You have some teachers who aren't credentialed, but they're doing reading and math?
No, what I mean is that a lot of times we'll have instructional aides doing intervention work, reading aides, and they may not be fully credentialed. But the investment that this school has made, even in an environment where California only had $6,000 per student, which wasn't that long ago, right? The investment that they made was in fully credentialed intervention teachers on top of the regular English language arts and math teachers to work in small groups of students on those fundamental skills.
Right, but we should be clear that there are some people who are fully credentialed we should never let anywhere near our children. Okay, so but I think that's an important point though, because
wait a minute, it's like saying, you know, we have well, I guess that could be true. Like you have a doctor who's board certified, but you shouldn't be the doctor.
Right. What I'm
Maybe
saying
that's
to you,
true, right?
what I'm saying to you is if fully credentialed was the criteria for educating our children, presumably a whole lot more of them would be educated because they are being not taught by fully credentialed people.
I see.
But I also want to make the point though, and I agree with you do want people who have the capacity to educate our children. So for example, people will set up tutorial programs for children who can't read. You can't tutor kids who can't read. You actually need someone who knows how to teach reading. There's a science to teaching reading. And there's 40 years of research on how to teach reading that gets ignored every day. So when she's using fully credentialed, in that sense, I totally agree with her. But the point I wanted to make, though, just being fully credentialed in and of itself does not guarantee that these are people who are going to be able to teach our children.
I've looked around South by Southwest. I've only been here a day, but I've looked around, and I noticed a lot of white people here. There are probably more white people here than black people here, and some of them in this room. And so a question we have from folks is, what can white people do to help?
It depends on what they're trying to do, man. I mean, like, no, seriously. I want to be clear about this. When black people came out of slavery, we came out of slavery with a clear understanding that we had been liberated, but we weren't free. And so the question then was, what is it that we have to do to actually be free? We bought into the notion that we needed an education. So when we came with that, 2 groups of white people descended on us, the industrialists and the missionaries. Each one of them had their own idea about what kind of education we needed, right? But what white people often do is they descend on us with the understanding that we want help, but we don't want to be controlled. And so the question is, how does one lend his or her skills to a people who need help without coming in a way that I am here to save you ignorant, poor folks who without us couldn't possibly do what needs to be done? So if you roll up into our communities with that attitude, hell, it is better for you to stay where you work. But if you come with the understanding that we do need help and you have a skill, but you're capable of relating to us in a way that respects our humanity and also respects our ability to make decisions about ourselves, you can be of great help. And there are people exactly like that, and there's probably some of them in this room. But there's some other in this room and floating around this whole thing up here who believes that wasn't nothing possible for black people until you invented the app. And so when you come at us like that, we're not trying to hear that. But when you come at us with saying, look, I do have something to offer here, and I am willing to work with you in a way that respects you and your community, then people can be of great value and are being of great value in various places throughout this country.
I have 2 requests, too.
Yes.
They're simpler than Dr. Fuller's because his is profound and large scale. Mine are more simple. There are 2 things that white folks could do for black education. First of all, realize that every morning black parents are handing their children over to a day mom. And a day mom is more times than not a white day mom. Black America is investing their children every morning, mostly into white women, the hands of white women every day. You got to get your mind around what that means, like for us, right? You can unpack that. I'll let y'all take that and do what you want with it. But white people and white women, if you are teaching, I love y'all. Just don't take this as like the wrong way. But if you can't teach, stop teaching, right? Because at best, we don't have any experts at teaching black students. We have students of teaching black students, right? That's the furthest America has gotten. We are learning, again, how to teach black students. Too many people who can't do it won't admit it, and they quit years ago, but they keep coming to school every day, right? Yeah. And that's a problem for us because we get saddled with more of those teachers than anybody else does, right? Any other group. And the second thing is if you can't teach us, and you can't run a school, and you can't keep it safe, orderly, and rigorous for us, get out of our way if we're going to find other means and other people to educate our children. That's my 2 requests, 2 simple requests.
But see, I think it's important, though, that people not leave here thinking, I speak for myself, I am not saying that there are not white people who are doing phenomenal work for our children. I know that not to be true. I know. We have white teachers in the school that I'm on the board of who are doing phenomenal jobs because they're good teachers. And a part of being a good teacher is being able to establish relationships with the kids you're teaching. And a part of being able to establish relationships is being humble, because our kids actually know stuff. And so when you approach them with an asset approach as opposed to a deficit approach, if you're a great teacher, irrespective of race, you can help those kids. Because we also know that there are black and brown people who don't, I'm not trying to have them teach our kids. I mean, because some of y'all are so bougie, I wouldn't even want y'all to even be dealing with our kids, right? Because y'all can't relate either. And so the point is that we need people who are great teachers. And all of us in this room would argue that it is important that some of those great teachers are black and brown, because our children need to see black and brown people who not only can relate to them, but also can make a decision. See, that's the other part of it, is that many times we put black and brown people in places where they really fundamentally are powerless. And so our kids sense that, right? That you up in here, but it's really these white people that's really making the decisions about what can be done. So when you create those types of environments, those can be detrimental to the overall effort to help our children. But again, I want to end by saying, and I don't mean this in a trite way, there are obviously white people, there are brown people, there's all kinds of people out there who are doing phenomenal jobs with our children. That is a true statement. But that does not mean that we should not continue to fight to have more black and brown people in leadership positions, more black and brown people teaching. But at the end of the day, we need people who are going to be teaching our kids who can teach our kids. and are willing to pay the price. And those of you who are teachers, I don't care whatever color you are, my respect for you is enormous, because there is no harder job out there that I know of than to work in a classroom every single day. I mean, look, when this dude wrote Teach Like a Champion, like, I taught for a week, right? He talked about 49 things, right? I went in there, man, I did 3 on a Monday. I was exhausted. You know, they had to, like, roll me out of there, man, after, like, so I just want to make that point.
And I should say, there's no saying, and it's no dumb saying, those that can do, those that can't teach. To your point, that was said by somebody who never spent a day in a classroom, and they don't know what in the world they're talking about. One of the things I want to ask you is, how do we get more people, not only just in the front of the classroom, but in the front office, who can make the kinds of decisions that really impact our children in a way that's meaningful towards achieving the highest kind of level of education that we want them to achieve? How do we get those people in place?
Yeah. You know, there's something that Howard said that I want to amplify, and that he used the word humility. And I think that anybody who's doing this work, I mean, really doing the work, regardless of what background they come from, will be humbled by the work. It's extraordinarily hard work, and it takes an extraordinary amount of commitment. I think we have to be very intentional about cultivating leaders of color. And that's leaders of color in the traditional public schools, and that's leaders of color in the public charter school sector. One thing that we've done is very intentionally built leadership programs. And because racism is so inefficient, so many people that are excellent people, talented people, don't get an opportunity to lead because the person in a position to make a decision can't see their talent because of their color, or can't see their talent because of their gender. And I tell you, I've had so many black men in particular come into my organization who hit that ceiling of being the disciplinarian but not the academic, right? Being the one sent out there to control the kids while the other folks made decisions about the kids' intellectual advancement. I created a leadership program where people can earn their license to be a principal, and I pay for it, and I put people through it, and tell them on the other end of this, you're going to run a school. And as a result, my schools are led by leaders of color, and they do excellent work because they advance their way through the ranks. And the thing about schools that are excellent, you are doing something specific. And when we're under stress, we fall back on what we know. So we have to make sure that we prepare people in a way where they deeply understand the model that they're implemented. So when they're under stress, and they will be under stress, they fall back on your way of doing the school. So I think being very intentional about leadership development is one way that we get people to the front office. And I think the other thing is that we have to invest in people of color. And I make this critique of the charter school movement, that if you are a black person with an idea, then you're a novice and a rookie. If you're a white person with an idea, you're an innovator. If you're a black person, you're a risk. If you're a white person, you're an investment. We are willing to invest in all kinds of ideas that aren't generated by blacks, but when blacks have an idea to do a thing, it becomes very difficult to take that quote-unquote risk. I think that if we want to have, particularly in the public charter school sector, more schools that are led by people of color, then the people with the resources have to specifically invest and view us as the entrepreneurs that those who led in this movement in the very beginning were viewed as. And I know that I've had an opportunity back in those days to be in the room when people with a lot of experience were given investments, where strategic decisions were made to invest in certain people. So if we want to see people of color in the front office, then we have to be able to invest in them. And there are lots of diverse strategies for doing that.
I think you really have to focus in on what Margaret just said. I mean, because look, man, like, you know, we got all these diversity strategies, but diversity with no power and money, you feeling me? And so, you know, we're in the room to make the room diverse. But the people in the room who got the resources are not us. And black people get asked to do $100 worth of work with $1. There are white people out here who get $100 and $1's worth of work is called awesome. And so at some point in time, we have to address that issue that Margaret is talking about. And those of us who are black, we got to quit being scared or scared, whatever word you want to use, to say it, to say it, so that people can't act like we okay with this. And so that point that she just made, I think, is just so crucial, and I appreciate her making it.
Chris, when you think about how do you get the leaders in the front of the class, in the front of the room, in the front office, who can make those decisions? How do you do that? I mean, it's a wonderful thing. It sounds terrific. But how did we make it happen?
I mean, it's a tough question that I really don't have an answer for because it's so complex. It's a problem that everybody's facing, right? There aren't any great pipelines that are just turning out great black principals. There are a lot of great black principals that are getting passed over from leading and running their own schools. And then when you do get them, a lot of them leave the field because they're frustrated that they don't have enough power to actually make decisions for the kids that they have in their building. But I can tell you about a situation in our district where we had 800 applicants for teaching positions. And we came away with 11, for instance, and we really had an emphasis on people of color, and that was very hard, and that's a every year type of thing. So to me, I don't see an easy answer to it until, number one, you start educating a lot more black people, first of all, right? Like that's gonna be the first, because everybody's going to the same colleges looking for people and whatnot, and when you go to that person and you say to them, listen, I know that you at this college and you're doing really well, and the engineering school is after you, and law school is after you, and medical, but how would you like a job teaching, making $35,000 a year, but you get three months off, right? Like
With no money.
What first generation person of color going to college is going to say that that's a good deal, especially with student loans, right? I got student loans, I'm in debt, and all these corporate and other people are coming looking for me because they, you know, their diversity Jesus kicked off years ago, right, in corporate, right? So they're looking for me, right? But you come with a teaching job or whatever. One of the clearest things that I can see happen are career changers. Like people who have already made some of their money, already have a little something in life. I've seen that be successful in some instances where you get people to come and be leaders, go through short-term training programs. But that's a non-answer. Like what I just told you is a non-answer because I actually don't see a clear, easy pathway to make it happen.
Margaret?
You know, I see a question on the screen that says, Ms. Fortune, how did you determine that charter schools would be the best approach to close the achievement gap? And I want to talk about, and keep in mind that, you know, I come from a background of educators on both sides of the family. We were the folks right after slavery who ran the one-room schoolhouse and did everything from teaching kids how to read to churning our own butter. My father is a retired school superintendent. You know, I went to the traditional public schools myself, and my dad handed me my diploma on my graduation day. So our investment in the traditional public schools is deep, it is rich, and it goes back generations. The reason that I came upon public charter schools was to be able to lead, was to be able to have self-determination. And because I got tired of going to community meetings with frustrated people who were trying to make change for black students around the edges, trying to understand you know, how to fix a broken school. And I realized, you know, the most valuable thing that I know how to do is how to operate a school. This was the conversation at the dinner table from the time I was born until maturation. It's in my bones. So why wouldn't I be the one to go out and open schools? And the schoolhouse is such a profound vehicle for the community. It's really like running a little city. You feed people, you clothe people, you educate people, and if the kids are young enough, you change their pants, I mean, everything. You're responsible for their health care. I mean, I mean, it is an enterprise that brings the community together. It is a community gathering place. It is framing the childhood of our future leaders. And the vehicle of public charter schools in my state is so extraordinary because the money follows the child. It is the most empowering thing for black people to do, to say, we are going to convene here in this schoolhouse and our taxpayer dollars are going to follow us. And we invest in that leadership. And this is the board that represents us. And these are my expectations. And if I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to leave. And you're going to be held accountable because every 3 to 5 years, if you don't meet your promises, somebody gets an opportunity to close you down. So that's why public charter schools was an important vehicle for this type of self-determination that we're talking about. And going back to that question of what white people can do, and it kind of reminded me of that scene in Malcolm X, right, when he's at Columbia.
Which one?
Malcolm X. You remember the movie Malcolm X?
Yes.
And, somebody comes up and says, "What can you do?" And Malcolm X says nothing. And the white woman goes away dejected. For me, many white people work for me, and they work hard, and they experience what it's like to work under black leadership. And in some instances, I feel like they see the world through my eyes because they see the difference in how I'm treated in the settings in which I operate and how they have seen other people treated. They understand that for us to get the same thing, we have to be 100% better. There is no room for error. We cannot make mistakes because the one mistake we make will be the mistake that they use to hang us with. And they are in that same boat because they're preparing for the same meeting to understand racism through the eyes of a black woman that they work with and work for and have to support in these extraordinary circumstances. And I think that going back to Howard's comment about the humility, seeing somebody you care about and respect be humbled in that way is transformative, not just for me as a black woman, but for the white people who work for me.
So the charter schools that you are operating, they are transformative in many ways. And Dr. Fuller, you had said earlier, because there is some tension, maybe it's not in this room, but there's some tension in this country between charter schools, public charter schools, and traditional schools, as if we can't have one, we can only have one, we can't have both. We can't have more than one way of educating children, and particularly black children. There's a lot of argument around that. But Dr. Fuller, you've been saying that there's not just one way that we're going to solve this problem. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be tension because the charter school movement is an insurgency movement. And so what happened is, years ago, we said, hey, we can do this better. And you can't hit somebody, and then when they slap you back, you can't go home crying to your mama. You know what I'm saying? That, oh, they hit me back. What the hell did you expect? I mean, you rolled up in their territory. So, so why are you crying? Why are you whining? Oh my God, can't we all just get along? Hell no, we can't all just get along. Right. No, we can't just all get along because we don't all come at this for the same reasons. And a point I want to make, because something Margaret says is really key, and I don't want this thing to end before we say this. We're focused on schools to help black children. Let's be clear. Black children who are hungry cannot learn. Black children who come to school and should get a medal just for showing up at school, given everything that they got to deal with before they ever roll up in our doors. And so we got to say to all of these people out here who, these legislators and stuff, who take a vote, like on charter schools, and we're supposed to be happy. You just voted against health care. You don't want our people to have a minimum wage. You're out here talking about voter ID. You're out here talking about every single thing that destroys the families and the communities of these children, and we're supposed to be happy because you supported charter schools. Hell no, we're not happy. Because we know that in order to truly educate our children, they need and deserve to be able to come to school having eaten, to come to school with just a modicum of the resources that they need to enforce the value of their humanity. And if when we get in these environments, we don't say that, you know, we just kind of let everybody think, like for example, we throw out, well, we need segregation. Are we saying that America is going to put, quote, integration on the backs of schools? You ain't going to do nothing about housing. You ain't going to do nothing about economic policy. You ain't going to do nothing about any of that, but we're going to integrate the schools. Come on, man. And we got to quit falling for that okie doke and not speaking clearly to say, yes, we believe that we can educate our children. We know that there are people who are educating our children in spite of all of these things that are happening, but we're not going to sit here and let you walk away thinking that it's okay for them to be hungry. It's okay for them not to have money. It's okay for them to live in violent communities. It's okay for them to kill rights. It's okay. Hell no, it's not okay. And we got to say it. And I'm saying it.
Don't look at me. I ain't trying to follow that. I see you looking at me like, what you looking at, Rehema? I'm not trying to. I agree.
But I got this all from Chris.
Co-sign, co-sign. Right.
But you know, it brings up a larger question. Mm-hmm. You talk about the legislature. If we're going to do something about the state of black education in America, it means that people have got to vote.
Yes.
Legislators don't get to be legislators just because they woke up that morning and wanted to be a legislator. Somebody had to vote them into their position. So, indeed, it's a complex problem we're talking about here because it touched many, many facets of society. If black people don't vote for the people who serve their best interests, then where are we?
But let's be clear, and I totally agree with you. There's no but to, I totally agree with you. But what I would argue that you also have to be in these people's face. That yes, we have to vote, but we also have to do whatever else it takes in order to put pressure on those who are in power. And we also cannot sit silently by when people do things that are detrimental to our communities. So for example, and I always get in trouble when I say this, Donald Trump is a despicable human being.
What did you say?
I said Donald Trump is a despicable human being.
Okay, I can see.
And that when things happen like calling countries of black people shithole countries, when talking about good people on both sides, when you see our it's not just Latino brothers and sisters who are affected by DACA. There are Haitians, there are Africans, there's all kinds of people who are being affected by this. If when we have these types of forums, we don't speak to those types of issues as well, because those things are having a detrimental impact on our schools every single day. When you have families who are scared to go out to public events because they're worried about being deported, when you have children who are crying because they're being bullied every single day, when all of these things are happening, we can't just talk about the newest curriculum. We have to also talk about how these things impact what we're trying to do every single day in schools. And so, yes, we must vote, but we must also raise our voices. We must also be on social media. We have to be everywhere possible. What did Derek Bell say? Derek Bell said, look, he said, we have to fight even when victory is not possible. Because not to fight is to co-sign on the injustice. We cannot do this. We must not do this.
Is that something for our teachers? And not alone, but are the teachers of the children of black children in America, is it part of their responsibility to teach? We're asking teachers to do a lot in schools, But is it especially important that teachers in schools where the majority of the children are black, is it important for those teachers to raise their voices about these issues that concern our children?
I'd say yes, and I think they do. And I want to back up to another point. Black people do vote, but the people we vote for sell us out at every turn, right? And so let's just be clear, we do vote. We vote a lot. As a matter of fact, we vote early and often, sometimes twice. Not just kidding.
Don't say that.
But we vote.
Don't say that.
But we vote. Did you
right?
just say that, Chris?
No, I didn't. We vote a lot, but the people that we vote for and haven't been in politics sell us out all the time. And it's just a reality of life, and we should be honest about that. One thing I want to say that I can't not say, in this is, I believe that parents have been professionalized out of the equation when we talk about education, right? And I'm only here, I'm not an educator. I don't run a school. I'm obsessive about studying education only because over 20 years ago, I had my first problem with schools with my first child. So I was just a mad parent. That's what has me in the room today. And I still have 3 in the public schools right now, right? So I've got like 2 decades of interacting with this system that has tried to professionalize me out of the equation. And when I show up to that, I can feel that every time that I'm there, right? I just know that, right? And these are not the experts. I'm the expert on my children. I'm the closest thing that God has given my kids to a president, right? That's what I am in my household. As long as my wife ain't watching, that's what I am, right? I just want to be clear about this. But we talk too little about this. Parents should be king. Our children, we talk about our children like they're poor sometimes. And if you were actually to add up all the people who earn a living off of our children, we probably end up with $1 million child, every one of us. So we should be walking in every school building. Like I got 3 kids in there right now. I got $3 million up in this joint, right? That's the way we should act, because we got pharmaceutical companies and counselors and coaches and teachers and interventionists and uncertified people working with them in separate rooms and whatnot. That sounded worse than it actually is, y'all. But at the end of the day, what I need people to stop doing is stop getting in my way when I want to make a decision about my own children, where I want to put them in school. If I want a culturally affirming school, we're going to get a culturally affirming school. If I want a school that's a charter, private, whatever it is that is going to, my children have per pupil income attached to them. The government has allocated that money to them, and everywhere I go, someone is trying to harvest them for their per pupil income. Black children are the new cotton for the education establishment, right? And everybody wants to harvest my children for their per pupil income everywhere they go. That's the only reason we're fighting about charter and regular schools, is because you get one off the plantation, that it's head count. Head count. That's all that people care about is head count. I have 3 in that head count right now. I just need people to get out my way. I need them to stop blocking me when I want to do something with my own children.
They are telling me we have to wrap, but I wish we could go. You have to find these people after this is over, because they have a lot more to say. And on that thought of the state of education for Black children, it is critical. I'm so glad that all of you were here to Margaret Fortune, Howard Fuller, Chris Stewart, thank you for your thoughts. Remember that our children come looking for you to make a difference in their lives. Thank you so very much.